They hurried back to Texas to buy more cattle, then headed right back up the newly named Goodnight Loving Trail before anyone else could beat them to it.
Loving was a man of religious instincts and one of the coolest and bravest men I've ever known, but devoid of caution.
Loving pushed on ahead to get in the partners' bid for new government contracts. But Comanches caught him on the open plain, shot him in the wrist and side, and chased him to a riverbank, where he held them off for several days before he crawled to safety in the night. He was picked up by a passing wagon and taken to an army hospital, but it was too late to save him. The night Loving died, he called his partner to his side.
His mind turned back to Texas, and at last he said, "I regret to have to be laid away in a foreign country." I assured him that he need have no fears, that I would see that his remains were laid in the cemetery at home. He felt this would be impossible, but I told him it would be done.
Goodnight ordered his men to fashion a tin casket out of flattened cans. They put Loving's wooden coffin inside, covered it with charcoal, sealed the top, and placed it in a wagon. Flanked by a cowboy escort, Goodnight started back south for Texas. Word of their profits had spread throughout cattle country, and other outfits were already streaming north, headed now for the nearest railheads from which they could ship their steers east. A new industry had been born. But in February of 1868, Charles Goodnight, the man who had helped start it all, was headed in the other direction. Keeping his promise to his dead partner, he was taking Oliver Loving home.
Railways, multiplied and spanning the continent, are essential domestic institutions. More powerful and more permanent than law, or popular consent, or political constitutions, to thoroughly complete the grand system which fraternizes us into one people. William Gilpin.
By the spring of 1869, the competition between the Central Pacific and the Union Pacific was converging on northern Utah. Rival armies of railroad men vied to cover the most ground and earn the most money for their employers before the two lines finally met. They tried to outdo one another, first laying 5 miles of track in a single day, then 6, then 7, and then 10 miles. A pace of railroad building such as the world had never seen. No fixed rendezvous point had ever been established. Grading crews for the two companies, working far ahead of the track layers, passed each other in opposite directions and pushed on for hundreds of miles, sometimes working so close to one another that explosions set off by one work gang spattered its rivals with dirt. Finally, the government intervened and picked Promontory Summit, 56 miles west of Ogden, as the place where the two lines would meet. The race across the West was coming to a close at last. On May 10th, 1869, everything was ready. A telegrapher stood by to signal to both coasts and all points in between the driving of the final spike.
To everybody, keep quiet. When the last spike is driven at Promontory Point, we will say done. Don't break the circuit, but watch for the signals of the blows of the hammer.
We understand. All are ready in the east. 4 spikes, 2 gold, 1 silver, and the 4th a blend of gold, silver, and iron, were to be tapped gently into position with a silver maul to mark the occasion. And then a final spike, an ordinary one, but wired to the telegrapher's key, was to be hammered into the ground.
Almost ready.
O Father,
Hats off. Prayers
God
being
of our
offered.
fathers, we desire to acknowledge thy handiwork in this great work.
The spike will soon be driven.
Upon us here assembled, and that mighty enterprise may be unto us as the Atlantic of thy strength, and the Pacific of thy love. Through Jesus the Redeemer. Amen.
We have got done praying. The spike is about to be presented.
The final spike was slid into place. Leland Stanford of the Central Pacific was to have the honor of driving it home.
The signal will be 3 dots for the commencement of the blows.
Stanford swung the hammer high above his head, brought it down, and missed. The telegrapher closed the circuit anyway.
Done.
In Washington, a great cheer went up from the big crowd in front of the telegraph office, and an illuminated ball dropped from the dome of the Capitol. At Independence Hall in Philadelphia, the Liberty Bell was rung, gingerly, so that its crack would not worsen. And in San Francisco, a huge banner was unfurled that proclaimed, "California annexes the United States." The vast distances of the West had at last been conquered. A journey that had once taken months could now be accomplished in a matter of days.
Once the rails were joined at Promontory, I think you can say that we began for the first time truly to think of ourselves as a continental nation. It was a kind of a reach of the national consciousness into a place that had once only been occupied by dreams and myths and imagination. And here was the great technological marvel of its time, crashing through those mythic barriers and going into a very real place.
That moment at Promontory Point is a moment of tremendous significance because on either side of that moment were vastly different worlds, radically different worlds. It foretold the whole story of technology, the coming of the machine. And what could be more symbolic of that new age, than the completion of the railroad, and the driving of the golden spike? Nothing would ever be the same in the West.
Our camp is united, we all labor hard, and if we are faithful, we'll gain our reward. Our leader is wise and a great leader too, and all things he tells us we're right glad to do. Hooray, hurrah, the railroad's begun. 3 cheers for our contractor, his name's Brigham Young. Hooray, hurrah, we're light-hearted and gay, just the right kind of boys to build a railway.
Brigham Young had brought his Mormon people west in search of sanctuary from the rest of the United States. But the new Transcontinental Railroad now ran right through Utah. And it began bringing thousands of new settlers into Young's kingdom. Non-believers who threatened his authority and deplored the Mormon practice of plural marriage, polygamy.
The Mormons must have viewed the completion of the Transcontinental Railroad with an incredible ambiguity. On the one hand, they were a very commercial people. They understood precisely how important the railroad was going to be to the growth of business and